Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to class this week. So this week it's me and Yanin, and we are going to be talking about political parody and public culture. So a few things that we'll try to address today is we'll talk about the author's perspective on parody. So we'll get to that first reading question that you all had. And then we'll talk about the four parodic operations, which you also addressed. And then finally, we'll talk about the positives and negatives of different types of political parody. So usually in class, we have a bunch of different ones that we watch. So I encourage you to watch a bunch of different options, but I will actually just show you one so we can talk about some positives and negatives of that one in particular. All right, so that is our plan for today. So when we talk about political parody, your author defines this as, or any parody, as an organic moment turned into something mechanical. And what happens here is it sort of exposes that the person is in action. So this sort of relates to thinking about how Burke has already told us that the world is a stage. Everything is dramatic. We are all actors. Parody allows for people who haven't been studying rhetoric, it allows for them to see that we are all actors. So it pushes them into thinking about what it means that our politicians are acting in front of us, and perhaps asks them to think a little bit more critically than usual. Your author talks a bit about like why he thinks that this is positive for democracy. And this is one of the questions that you all had to answer. So there were a bunch of different reasons why he felt this was true. And I sort of already said one of them. So that idea that it gets the readers to think critically about what is being presented to them. A few other things that could happen here, and something that Harriman believes is positive to democracy, is that it promotes self-awareness. So your author talks about this as like, I think his daughter is like doing a parody of him and it makes him feel really uncomfortable. Well, if you can imagine anyone trying to do what it is that you do, if I saw them like doing all the tics that I do, like using my hands and the stuttering and all of that, if I saw them doing that next to me, that would make me even more self-aware than I already am, because I've looked at them and said, oh, wow, that's what I look like. And so this can be really good for democracy, because perhaps some politicians will then start to reflect on some of the things that they're doing that might be either problematic or might be discouraging people from listening to them. Is this making sense, Yanin?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing that's happening here is that it makes the individual feel threatened if someone else can do pretty much exactly what they were already doing. And so, that whole idea that, everyone's special and everyone's unique comes crashing down because we start to realize that maybe we weren't as special as we had originally thought. And that can also be positive, right? We are able to see connections with other people when we start to break down this like I am an individual thing. And that can also encourage people who are watching the parody to then think about, okay, I guess maybe this person who's a politician, let's say Bernie Sanders, might not be that different from Donald Trump, right? They might be both just performing in ways to build some sort of identification. Yanin, do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, so this is sort of building the foundation of what Harriman talks about as far as political parody goes. In order for us to understand it better, he gives us 4 parodic operations. So he sort of creates the word parodic. That's not an actual word, but it is now. And typically in class, I'll have you do this. I think this is one of your reading questions, so you sort of already did this. Yanin, do you remember any of the parodic operations that you were asked to answer?
Yes.
Okay, can you just tell me one of them?
Doubling.
Okay, good. I'm happy that you gave me that one because that's the first one that I have on my slides. So it worked out really nice. So doubling is traditionally what we think of when we think of parody. So it's placing the original up against the copy, right? And what that allows for is that you can start to see although they can be almost exactly alike, you can start to see a little bit of differences. And that can sort of get the mind going as far as, okay, this isn't two of the exact same thing. So what do I think about this? Anything to add for doubling, Yanin?
No.
Okay, yeah. It's sort of just telling us that like these two things can operate at the same time, and that's okay. Right. So the next one is carnivalesque spectatorship, and this one is happening all of these are really happening at the same time, but it's happening especially if doubling is done in a way that is exaggerated. Carnivalesque spectatorship is saying that when a parody happens and your audience knows that it's a performance, they then turn into spectators of the world. So in other words, rather than being very passive, they start to sort of watch around them and try to see all of the different acts that's going on. And they turn into this only if they can tell that the parody is a performance. Are you with me so far, Yanin?
Yes.
Okay, so what's happening here is that the people who are in power, the politicians, are being sort of demasked. And so we're taking some of their power away by saying that like, oh, we're all watching you and we're waiting for you to do something silly or for you to do something really good. This is giving a little bit of power to the people rather than the politicians. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next one. Do you want to guess which one I have up here next? Okay, I gave it away. So the next two that I have, number 3, leveling relates to bringing, so we talked about how carnivalesque spectatorship brings the audience up. Leveling brings the people in power down. So we level when we make the politician look foolish, right? So this example right here is Bassem Youssef. He is an Egyptian comedian, and what he does there is he makes the politicians look foolish, and that's something that's way looked down on way more than it is here. He's in fact been arrested for some of the jokes that he's had, but doing something like this allows for people who are not in power to see that, you know, they're just as foolish as the rest of us. Right, so think about this as like leveling the playing field, bringing them down. Any questions about this one?
No.
Okay, cool. And then the last one, so this one is probably the most complicated. It's the most complicated to understand and the most complicated to explain. But think about this one as sort of the result of the other 3. So when I talk about this, the way that he describes this is that parody transforms the world into a field of competing voices. And what he's saying with that is that once you have like these two things placed against each other, and you start to see that like those two things can operate at the same time, you then start to realize that many different perspectives can operate at the same time. So you start to realize, and what's happening here is that you might be critiquing the person's beard. So like here, they're making fun of this person's beard, but at the same time, they're critiquing the person's power as well. And something that's really powerful about parody is that you don't have to explicitly create some of the jokes that people are getting. Are you following me, Yanin?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I'll leave it at that. I guess the last thing I'll say is think about this as like reading between the lines and seeing all of the arguments that are created between the lines, and that those are the fields of competing voices that you're starting to sort of be exposed to just by watching one parody. Okay, so before I actually want to show an example. So I don't do a lot of video examples online, but I think for this, it's really important that you see an example. Before we do that, any questions about the 4? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share something different. So give me a second. It's going to be a video. Okay, so this video is from the 2016 election, so it's a little bit old, but it does all of those 4 things that I was just talking, right? So if this were like a real Hillary Clinton speech, she definitely wouldn't hold herself accountable for that. But this sort of conversation between the real Hillary Clinton and the fake Hillary Clinton allowed for that to be addressed and sort of brought her down to normal levels with everyone else. Is that making sense?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And then the last example before we try to tie everything up, the idea of the field of competing voices, what's happening here is all the things that I've just said, of course, but then on top of that, it's sort of forcing us into thinking about the branding that goes on in politics overall. So even though this clip was just about Hillary Clinton, another competing voice is sort of thinking about the branding and how problematic it is that they can't be real people when they're running the election. Another one would be sort of at the beginning of the parody when Miley Cyrus and one of the other actors said something like, oh, Carly Fiorina would be the best female or best first female president. And then we have Hillary Clinton right there. And even though they didn't explicitly say anything about how Hillary Clinton had been working so hard to try to be the first female president, everything implied in that sort of parody made those sorts of things come up in our brain. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So what your author is trying to say in the end is that, and we won't show this one because I don't want to give you any more things we have to analyze, but what your author is trying to tell us in the end is that the positives of parody is, the people can start to gain a little bit more power, right? But at the same time, parody can be really negative for democracy when we are tricked into allowing parody to reinforce powerful individuals or reinforce stereotypes. So, for example, that Hillary Clinton clip that I just showed you did have some levels of like bringing us up and her down. But in reality, if you think critically about what you saw there, she actually utilized parody to help give her more power, because all of a sudden people start to see her as being sort of self-deprecating, and it adds to her credibility. And for Harriman, the author, he finds that to be somewhat problematic because, again, he wants parody to sort of be the tool of the people rather than the tool of the powerful. And so he warns us to be aware of when maybe the powerful are sort of using it instead. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I have a question about this. And so in which situation is the parody will get the positive effects?
So are you saying when would it have political effects? Is that what you asked?
I mean, use the parody. How to use the parody in the right place to get the positive influence?
Yeah. So you're asking like when does parody become more powerful? Is that sort of where you're going with this?
Yes.
Okay, so I think it depends on who's using it. And I would say that sometimes parody is the most powerful when we've been manipulated by the people in power so much, and when they're suppressing our free speech. Parody is one way to sort of get through those regulations without actually getting punished. So, for example, the Bassem Youssef article, or the person that I talked about, he, as well as other people in like Iran, I think there's one in there's some all over the world, and what they've used parody in order to make fun of the people in power And the freedom of speech laws are so murky because they're not explicitly saying anything that's bad, right? They're just making it so the audience can interpret things that are bad, right? That I think is when parody can be the most powerful. As far as here in the United States right now, I think parody can be the most powerful for politicians if they're able to use it in a way that makes them look like they can take a joke, like what Hillary Clinton just did. But I think as far as like for the people, which is what Harriman wants, I think political parody is something that happens more so, not necessarily on SNL, but more so online on like YouTube, where you're seeing people sort of come up with these creative examples that are not really funded by people like NBC. Right? So there's a lot of different ways that parody can become really powerful. It just depends on, I guess, who you want to have the most power.
Oh, I see.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, what other questions do you have?
No.
No more?
No more.
Okay, all right, well, that's it for today then. And as always, this goes for you and everyone else if they've stayed this long. If you have any questions, feel free to send them my way, and I'm always happy to help you out in any way that I can. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Okay,
Thank
all
you,
right, have
Professor.
a great day.
Okay, you too.
All right, bye.
Bye.